In 1982, a couple of tourists set out to explore the Andes, driven by the desire to venture into one of the most inhospitable and challenging regions on the planet. Their story begins like any typical expedition, searching for something beyond the mundane. They weren't just any adventurers, but people passionate about nature, the vastness of the mountains, and the personal challenge of getting lost in the immensity of a landscape that, though terrifying, was indescribably beautiful. Who could resist the temptation to explore the Andes, with its towering altitudes, otherworldly landscapes, and its reputation as both a paradise for adventurers and a graveyard for the unwary? The couple, like so many others before and after them, was in search of an encounter with themselves, with nature, and perhaps with a bit of transcendence. But what was meant to be a journey of discovery and overcoming became one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in the history of exploration. For a moment, it's easy to imagine the couple on their hike, challenging the vast and icy landscapes of the Andes. They were seeking something personal, something beyond just crossing a mountain or conquering a new climbing route. They wanted to explore the unknown, to feel small before the magnitude of the world, and perhaps to understand the beauty and ferocity of nature in a unique and profound way. Simply getting lost among the mountains was, to them, a form of finding themselves. As every nature lover knows, the silence of the great mountains brings with it something inexplicable, something that draws us closer to the essence of being human. However, nothing could have predicted what was to come. At some point during the trip, something went wrong, and that mistake would never be fully understood. The couple's disappearance wasn't just a personal tragedy, but an enigma that challenged experts, mountaineers, and even the most skeptical. The Andes are vast and treacherous. That region, where the earth seems to breathe with the presence of the mountains and the wind chills to the bone, is a place where each step could be the last. It's no surprise that many adventurers throughout history have disappeared without a trace. There's something in the Andes that transforms the journey into a battle between man and nature, where the strongest doesn't necessarily win, but rather the one lucky enough to survive. The couple, like so many others, may not have been defeated by the force of nature, but by its relentless indifference. Disappearing in the vastness of a place like the Andes is an experience that goes far beyond simply losing the way. The feeling of disorientation, of being consumed by the enormity of something that cannot be controlled, is the first step toward the mystery that followed. And so their disappearance became marked as a gap, an absence that cried out for answers. The terrain where the couple vanished is inaccessible, with towering mountains, treacherous cliffs, and a rugged geography that hardly favors human action. Imagine then the challenge for anyone trying to search for answers in a place where nature is an impassable barrier. The mystery began to take shape in the first hours after their disappearance. There were no clues, no traces, no clear explanation for what might have happened. Suddenly, those two nature-loving adventurers became part of an enigmatic story. The mountains, which once welcomed them with promises of beauty and tranquility, became complicit in a profound silence that kept the world waiting. What could have happened? How could someone disappear without leaving a single trace, not even a hint of their fate? The silence of the mountains seemed to be the only answer. And the most intriguing thing of all was that over time, their disappearance didn't bring answers but only more questions. The mountain setting, with its vastness and isolation, was the perfect stage for an unsolved mystery. No matter how hard people tried to understand, the simplest explanations, like an accident or a fatality caused by nature, seemed as time passed increasingly unsustainable. This led to a whirlwind of theories, some more rational, others more fantastical. Some suggested the couple might have been victims of a fatal accident in the mountains, while others talked about a tragedy linked to the unpredictable weather conditions. Still others questioned the idea that nature could be the only responsible factor, and began speculating about darker events, like a possible suicide or something more sinister involving human agents. In any case, what remained was the silence of the Andes. And no matter how many years passed, nothing seemed to clarify the mystery. Time, instead of helping to find an explanation, only fueled doubt and uncertainty. The couple's fate became more and more ambiguous, and at the same time, more fascinating. The mountains, with their majestic indifference, seemed to hold the answers for themselves, as if they were protecting something greater. But what could be so big, so imposing, that even the passing of years wouldn't reveal it? The mystery was just beginning, and who would dare to penetrate the vast unknown to search for answers? Now let's imagine for a moment that, 15 years later, something unexpected happened. A revealing detail could change everything, and transform this mystery into something much more complex than anyone could imagine. The search for answers was just beginning, and what seemed like a tragedy now became fertile ground for new speculations and theories. This is just the beginning of a path that will lead to an even more surprising discovery, and it seems the mountains were about to reveal one of their greatest secrets. When the couple disappeared in the Andes, the outside world, which only knew the echoes of the distant mountains, was overcome by a mix of desperation and incredulity. How is it possible for someone to simply disappear in such a vast and wild region? This question quickly spread, fueling an atmosphere of confusion. For the family, the first reaction was shock, as if this were a scene from a movie, something that couldn't possibly happen for real. However, as the hours passed, reality set in, and a deep pain took over everyone involved. Among them, the wife of one of the missing became the protagonist of this painful story. Her grief wasn't just about losing a partner, but not being able to understand what had happened, not having the chance to say goodbye or at least have clear answers. The wife, completely devastated by the loss, was overwhelmed by a desperate need to understand what had happened. The pain of losing someone in such an abrupt way, with no clue about their fate, created a black hole of uncertainty. At first, her reaction was one of disorientation. What would she do? Where would she go? Who could give her answers? She tried, as many would, to believe that he was lost somewhere, still alive, waiting to be rescued. With nothing concrete to hold on to, she clung to the idea that he could somehow be out there, just waiting to be found. This hope, although faint, was what kept her going in the first days, weeks, and months after the disappearance. The anguish of not being able to bury her loved one and not having a concrete explanation for what had happened became unbearable as each day passed. But as time went on, the months began to drag on, and reality set in. She knew that the chances of finding him alive were shrinking, but her search for answers never stopped. What initially seemed like a tragedy from an unexpected accident now seemed more complex. The absence of signs and the silence of the mountains added to the sense that something was being hidden. It was as if nature had swallowed the couple, as if the Andes, in their vastness, had erased any trace of their passage. And it wasn't just the couple that had vanished, but also any clear explanation of what had happened to them. The wife, though consumed by grief, found herself on an endless search for something that could explain the emptiness that now dominated her life. She wanted answers. She wanted to understand what had happened. The frustration of not having a clear explanation, something that could at least provide some closure, consumed her. At this point, mourning turned into obsession. She wasn't just suffering from the loss, but also from the lack of answers. This led her down a path of speculation, where any clue, no matter how small, became a possible key to understanding what had happened. The theories about the couple's disappearance began to multiply. The idea that it had been an accident was one of the first hypotheses to be considered, but it quickly proved insufficient. The lack of clues and the fact that the couple had disappeared in such a remote area suggested that perhaps the explanation was more complex. Some people spoke of a suicide, possibly driven by an emotional crisis, or something that had led them to lose the will to live. But these theories seemed even further from the truth, as if they were trying to fill a void with explanations that didn't make sense. What had happened to the couple? What could be so big, so mysterious, that it simply made them disappear without leaving any trace? As time passed, the pain and frustration intensified. The wife, now desperate for answers, began to distance herself from her friends and family, and her social life became a battleground between the need to find answers and the desire to heal. She found herself in an emotional limbo, where the desire to understand what happened to her husband clashed with the need to move on with her own life. And even so, her search didn't diminish. She began investing her time in books about mountaineering, in accounts of other expeditions that had occurred in the region, hoping to find something that could shed light on the mystery. Like many people in moments of grief, she clung to anything that promised an explanation, a justification for what had happened. The pain of not having a concrete explanation was accompanied by an even greater discomfort. The fact that many people didn't believe her suspicions. It was common to hear comments that she should move on or let it go, as if simply continuing to live could erase the pain of loss and uncertainty. But that never happened. The wife withdrew from everyday life, focusing exclusively on the mystery of her husband and his journey, and no matter how much they tried to convince her that it was time to move on, she just couldn't. Her husband's disappearance was not something she could leave behind like a book read and forgotten on a shelf. It was something that had become part of her essence, an emotional burden she would carry for the rest of her life. She could no longer envision a future without him, without answers. This insatiable need to understand what happened to the couple created increasing tension in family relationships and with friends. Many wanted her to move on, to accept the loss and allow herself to heal. But for her, this acceptance made no sense. How could she accept something she didn't understand? How could someone let go of a loss without even understanding the reason for it? The wife in some way believed that finding an explanation would be the only way to free herself from this pain. What she didn't know was that her search for answers would not only lead her to a new understanding of what happened, but would also confront her with realities that could change everything she believed. As the years passed, the mystery became harder to face. The searches, although intensified at one point, scattered over time. When it seemed that all possibilities had been explored, that all alternatives had been analyzed, the wife found herself once again confronted with something she couldn't explain. The theories contradicted each other, and the clues seemed to vanish before her eyes. How can someone overcome a loss in a way that never becomes complete? How can one truly understand what happened when the truth seems to hide in the shadows? What seemed like a simple disappearance became a matter of life and death, history and mystery, and above all, an incessant search for something greater than words could define. For the wife, this disappearance was never just a tragedy. It was the key to something much bigger that she still couldn't understand. But time, as always, has its own way of arranging things, and what seemed like endless pain began to generate new clues. Deep down, something was about to change. In 1997, more than a decade after the mysterious disappearance of the couple in the Andes, an unexpected discovery sparked a new flame of hope and a fresh wave of perplexity about the case. Amid routine satellite image reviews, something unusual caught the attention of an analyst. An image, taken from an area marked as difficult to access, revealed a human shape, a silhouette, in the exact location where the couple had disappeared years earlier. The image wasn't clear or conclusive, but enough to reignite the mystery that had lingered for so long. How could it be possible that, after so many years, something so seemingly trivial, like a satellite image, revealed such a crucial clue? That figure in the image appeared to be a person or something similar, and soon speculation began to spread. Was it possible that the couple had survived for so long in such an inhospitable environment? Or was it an illusion, a misinterpretation of the image? For the family, this discovery was like a flash of light in a tunnel of hopelessness. The wife, who had been searching tirelessly for answers for years, found herself confronted with a completely new possibility. The couple might not have died in the mountains, as everyone had assumed. Perhaps, somehow, they had survived. And if so, what had happened between the moment of their disappearance and the image found so many years later? The possibility that her husband was alive, somewhere in the mountains, made the wife's emotions surge once more, even more intensely. For her, having lived so many years under the weight of uncertainty, this was the type of answer she most desired. However, as anyone who has dealt with an unresolved mystery for so long knows, no answer would be simple. The image was a clue, but not a definitive answer. It was just a key to a new possibility, one she was willing to explore, despite the emotional exhaustion she carried. The image was not a solution. It raised more questions than answers. What was that silhouette? Could it be a person, or just a natural phenomenon resembling a human shape? The location of the image was a remote area, where few people had passed, and the terrain was extremely rugged, making any rescue attempt incredibly difficult. The possibility of survival in such an inhospitable area seemed, at first glance, almost impossible. Furthermore, the image didn't show enough detail to confirm that it was truly the couple. What the image revealed was only what it could be, a clue, not a solution. And with that, the doubt and tension grew, as the discovery only deepened the mystery without providing a clear explanation. However, the mere fact that this image existed was already a significant twist. Up until that point, the prevailing narrative was that the couple had disappeared without a trace, swallowed by the vastness of the mountains. The idea of an accident, of a natural tragedy, seemed to be the most plausible explanation. But now, that image offered a new perspective, challenging all previous theories and forcing investigators to reevaluate everything they thought they knew about the case. It was as if the mountains were finally giving their first real clue, as if, in some way, nature was allowing the truth to begin to emerge. The idea that the couple might have been alive for so long changed the entire dynamic of the investigation. If they were still out there, it meant the mystery had become far more complex than imagined. There were more layers to be uncovered, and these layers were becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. With this new clue, a new type of investigation began. Now, the narrative being built wasn't just about a disappearance, but about the possibility of prolonged survival under extreme conditions. The wife, once again, found herself immersed in the pain of uncertainty, but also in hope. Something that seemed impossible just months ago now seemed plausible. She knew that this new path would require great effort, but she also knew she had to explore every possibility. She couldn't, in her mind, let the chance of discovering what really happened to her husband slip away. Renewed hope drove her to search for answers with even more fervor. Now, more than ever, she clung to the idea that the truth was within reach. Meanwhile, a new wave of investigations was set in as the image more closely, trying to discover more about the shape. It was then that a crucial detail was identified. The silhouette appeared to be moving, as if someone was actually walking. What had initially seemed like a simple image of something static became something more intriguing. A clue that there was someone alive in that area. The image in itself didn't provide a clear answer about the person's identity or how they had ended up there, but it was enough to reignite the fire of the investigation. The news spread quickly, and with it, new researchers and mountaineers became interested in the case, willing to face the challenge of investigating such a dangerous and remote region. This new push for investigation created a renewed atmosphere of mystery, in which new possibilities opened up. But the answers were still far from clear. Now, speculation took over the narrative. And to complicate things further, there were those who suggested that maybe the couple had fallen victim to something even more sinister. An event that might have involved an escape, a conspiracy, or even an element of character unrelated to nature. For those who thrived on more dramatic theories, the idea of a conspiracy seeped into the speculations, creating new layers of mystery that seemed more plausible as time went on. The big problem was that none of these possibilities could be proven yet. What was certain, however, was that the discovery of the satellite image had changed the entire landscape of the investigation. The disappearance, once considered a case of pure tragedy, had now become a much more complex issue with multiple lines of investigation open. Some believed the couple was still alive, while others thought that even if they were dead, the circumstances of their disappearance deeper. The wife, as always, didn't know what to believe. She was torn between the pain of loss, but something inside her, a deep instinct that refused to accept the end of something without answers, drove her to seek more, to dig deeper, to understand what had really happened. She knew the truth was closer than ever, but she also knew that this truth might be even harder to accept than the loss she had experienced. And so, with the emergence of this clue, a simple image, but with great implications, the story of the missing couple in the Andes took a dramatic turn. The search for the truth was far from over, and with that, the mystery seemed to grow. Each new detail, each new clue, opened more questions and offered more possibilities. What would be needed now was the courage to explore those possibilities, to face the mountains, to understand what really happened in that inhospitable region. The end of the story was still far from being reached. When the satellite image was discovered in 1997, something that seemed lost forever was brought back to the surface. Authorities, family members, and investigators were dealing with a case that seemed to drag on endlessly. The idea that the couple might have been spotted so long after their disappearance added a new dimension to the mystery. The discovery not only reignited hope for finding answers, but also left a series of unanswered questions. If the couple had been found in a difficult-to-access area, what did that mean for what had actually happened? The region where the image was taken was one of the most inhospitable areas in the Andes, a place few people dared to go. And due to its vastness and rugged terrain, it made any kind of rescue or exploration extremely difficult. It was impossible not to be intrigued by the possibility that somehow the couple had survived for so long in that relentless terrain. But if this were true, how could they have stayed alive for so long without any signs of external help? The first thing the investigators did was assemble a multidisciplinary team made up of experts in mountaineering, geographers, historians, and even technicians working with satellite images. Each of these professionals had a vital role to play. The task was enormous: to reconstruct the timeline of events, investigate the conditions of the terrain, examine the satellite image, and look for any clue that could confirm or disprove the hypothesis that the couple was still alive after so long. To begin, the team of specialists started with a reanalysis of the weather conditions at the time the couple had disappeared. It was known that the month in question had been marked by extreme storms that hit the Andes region, making the conditions even more dangerous. Unforeseen storms and limited visibility are a nightmare for any expedition, especially in such remote areas. But why hadn't the couple been able to shelter, or worse, why hadn't they left any clear clues about their fate? The storm, while it had caused difficulties, didn't fully explain their complete disappearance. As the climate analysis was taking place, investigators began to review more closely the reports from other mountaineers who had made expeditions through the same region in the following years. Those who had passed through the area where the couple disappeared brought in new crucial information. One particular report stood out. A climber who had been in the region shortly after the couple's disappearance had found an abandoned campsite, apparently left in a hurry. The situation was strange because there were no signs of panic, as one might expect from a hasty escape. The campsite appeared to be in relatively good condition, with no clear signs of struggle or immediate emergency. Some provisions were still intact, and the shelter seemed to be in perfect condition, without any sign of destruction or accident. The strangest thing was the feeling that the couple had not been forced to leave the site due to any kind of desperation. Why then would they have left the campsite without any clear sign of where they were going or what direction they were headed? This discovery was a turning point in the investigation. The fact that the campsite was in good condition, with some items left behind but no signs of panic or struggle, was a strong indication that the couple had decided to leave on their own. But the crucial question was, where to? And what could have led them to do that? Something was being hidden, something no one had yet uncovered. Perhaps nature had exerted its force on them, but the lack of tangible clues indicated there was another explanation behind their disappearance. This twist, which seemed more like a curiosity, began to generate a new line of investigation. If the couple had left the campsite without haste, it indicated that there was something at play that wasn't just an accident or a natural fatality. There was something deeper behind their decision to abandon everything and leave. As the investigation advanced, a new piece was added to the puzzle: the couple's personal diary. The diary, found by a mountaineer searching the area years later, turned out to be one of the most important keys to understanding what had really happened. It was filled with detailed descriptions of the couple's journey, but something in the content of the last entries caught even more attention. The diary spoke about the growing sense of discomfort the couple was feeling during the expedition, as if something wasn't quite right. There were mentions of an important discovery, a discovery they were making during the journey, but the details were vague and cut off abruptly. The tone of the last pages of the diary suggested that, at some point, the couple felt they were dealing with something bigger than just a simple exploration trip. But what was this discovery? Had they found something in the mountains that was affecting their decisions? And more importantly, what led them to stop writing at the very point where they were closest to understanding what was happening? The investigation team delved into the diary's notes and began reviewing all the points mentioned in the text. They tried to trace a timeline that would link the events in the diary to the accounts of other mountaineers. However, the deeper they dug, the more the case became a tangled web of possibilities. The diary didn't provide all the answers the investigators were looking for, but it brought a new dimension to the mystery. The feeling that something was being hidden, something the couple might have discovered in the mountains. And if that something was the real reason for their disappearance? The idea that the couple was hiding something, or that their expedition had been more than just a search for personal adventure, now seemed more plausible. Meanwhile, the atmosphere of mystery and speculation intensified. The wife of the missing man, still immersed in her mourning and the search for answers, no longer knew what to believe. The satellite image, the discovery of the abandoned campsite, the diary, and now the revelation that the couple seemed to be hiding something, all raised more questions than answers. The pain of loss didn't seem to lessen, but the desire to understand what had happened intensified. She didn't know what was worse: the loss of her husband, or living with the uncertainty that there was something deeper involved in his disappearance. Her spirit, broken by grief, found itself dragged into a new investigation, a new search for answers. What happened on that expedition? What had they found? What forced this radical change in behavior? What once seemed like a simple case of disappearance was now taking a new direction. It wasn't just about a couple lost in the mountains, it was about what they might have discovered. The idea that there was something more at the center of this mystery was starting to become clearer. The expedition, which had seemed like a quest for adventure, was revealing a darker and more complex side to the story. What the couple had discovered could be the key to explaining their decision to leave everything behind. The search for the missing couple was becoming more and more a search for the truth about what happened to them and what else might be hidden in the mountains. What had nature kept hidden in its depths? What, within the vastness of the Andes, led them to disappear without a trace? The team knew that now the only way to answer these questions was to investigate even more deeply into the terrain. The next expedition would be the most challenging up to that point. They needed to understand more about the details of the routes the couple had followed, explore the abandoned campsite, and follow the diary's trail to the end. The search for answers was becoming a mission with high risks and enormous challenges. The mystery was intensifying, and the only thing that seemed clear was that the answers, if they existed, were hidden somewhere deep within that unforgiving landscape. What had the couple discovered in the mountains, and what did it mean to them, could be the key to understanding the entire mystery surrounding their disappearance. But in the meantime, the search continued, with more questions than answers, and a growing pressure to uncover the truth that seemed more and more to be beyond reach. As the investigation progressed, new figures began to emerge in the disappearance of the couple in the Andes, and with them, new revelations and suspicions that were far from being resolved. What had once seemed like just a tragic mountain accident was now taking on complex layers and possibilities that went far beyond a simple fatality. Each new character that appeared in the story brought a piece of the puzzle, but also fueled even more unanswered questions. Some of these figures were directly connected to the couple's expedition or rescue, while others had only an indirect knowledge of the area and the circumstances surrounding the disappearance. What they all had in common, however, was that their stories and testimonies seemed tied to something deeper and stranger, something involving more than just an accident. The first character to appear was Ricardo, a veteran mountaineer who had ventured through the Andes during the 1980s, shortly after the couple's disappearance. Ricardo wasn't just an experienced mountaineer. He was also a survivor of a previous expedition that had faced the same barren and inhospitable terrain where the couple had disappeared. His experience in the mountains made him a key figure in the investigation, but his story also raised a series of new doubts. In one of his interviews with the investigative team, Ricardo spoke about his own expeditions in the region and how he had unsuccessfully attempted a rescue of the couple. According to him, after the disappearance, he and his team of climbers approached the same area where the couple had last been seen. But strangely, they found no signs indicating the couple's fate. The terrain was vast and desolate, and the weather conditions made everything even more difficult. What intrigued Ricardo the most, however, were the strange sensations he had during the search, as if something was hidden there, something beyond the relentless and indifferent nature of the mountains. Ricardo described an unusual scenario during his expedition, as if he and his team were being guided by something they couldn't see. He said that as they got closer to the area where the couple had disappeared, some members of the team started reporting a growing sense of discomfort, as if they were being watched. He also mentioned a deep silence in the air, as if the mountains were hiding something, as if nature itself were guarding a secret. This may sound like a vague explanation, but for Ricardo, it was something he felt intensely. He believed that something had happened in the mountains, something out of the ordinary, that was not being properly addressed by the authorities or the rescue team. The strangest thing of all was when he mentioned that, in his conversations with other climbers, there was always a sense that the government or local authorities were trying to downplay the situation. Ricardo felt that something was being hidden, not just the fate of the couple, but the very nature of the terrain and the conditions they had faced. This feeling that something was being hidden gained weight when other members of Ricardo's expedition began to speak out. In several informal conversations, they mentioned the lack of proper explanations during the search and the peculiar behavior of the authorities responsible for organizing the rescue missions. According to reports, there was a constant absence of resources, as if the efforts to find the couple had been systematically neglected, or worse, sabotaged. This caused great discomfort among the investigators, as Ricardo's claims didn't seem to be merely the result of a misinterpretation of the circumstances. Distrust regarding the actions of the authorities was growing. What intrigued everyone the most was the local authorities' attitude, which seemed less concerned with finding answers and more inclined to follow a simple accident narrative. This generated a sense of frustration among Ricardo's expedition members, who began to question the motivations behind this passive approach. There didn't seem to be a real urgency to unravel the mystery, something that appeared to be quietly kept from the public. This observation began to raise new suspicions in the investigators. Why were the authorities so apathetic? Was there a reason for not wanting to dive deeper into the investigation? Were they involved in some way? Or was it simply a matter of incompetence? These questions couldn't be ignored. As the investigation continued, another important figure emerged. Sophia, a historian specializing in mountaineering events who had direct ties to the Andes region. Sophia had studied similar cases of disappearances and had conducted investigations and expeditions involving dangerous, hard-to-reach terrain. When she entered the scene, she brought with her a new perspective. She began revisiting old documentation of past expeditions in the same region and found something disturbing. Records of other mysterious disappearances of people who were in search of something very similar to the missing couple. An expedition to explore, understand, and challenge human limits in the mountains. Sophia discovered that in the years prior to the couple's disappearance, other people had gone missing or died under similar conditions, but the pattern was unusual. These disappearances didn't appear to be the result of a common natural accident. In some cases, people simply vanished without a trace, as if they had been absorbed by the mountains. There were no clear explanations, just the void of not knowing. Sophia's discovery led the investigators to consider a new possibility. Was the disappearance of the couple related to a series of similar events that had occurred in the region? The fact that there were other disappearances under similar circumstances couldn't be ignored. Perhaps there was a pattern to follow. This pattern wasn't something the investigators could simply dismiss, and Sophia was firm in her observations that there was a connection between these cases. Her hypothesis, although difficult to prove, began to gain traction. Could it be that the couple had been approaching something big and unknown, that led them to disappear, something that nature couldn't hide, but simply swallowed everything around it? Amid all this, the investigators began to notice a peculiar pattern in the reactions of some members of the expedition. Although the official investigation had not made significant progress, some details began to stand out. Communication with the local authorities continued to be strange, often going unanswered or with vague responses, which didn't make sense given the gravity of the situation. Additionally, some of the testimonies from other climbers began to contradict each other. During the search, there were reports of someone who claimed to have seen the couple in a distant area, but when pressed for details, this person couldn't be clear about the exact location or events that occurred.
For some investigators, this started to suggest that there was an attempt to manipulate or, at the very least, distract from the real events. However, the biggest point of tension was in the motivations of those involved in the search. The wife of the missing man, who was becoming more and more involved in the search for answers, began to notice that the investigation was being subtly, but effectively, manipulated.
Her intuition told her that something was being hidden, something beyond the simple pain of loss. How the authorities and those involved were handling the information made everything seemed to follow a script she couldn't fully understand. The constant presence of external elements and contradictory information began to indicate that perhaps the answer to the disappearance of the couple was closer than we thought. But it wouldn't be easy to understand. The truth now seemed to be something no one was truly ready to face. The growing suspicion that there was a conspiracy involving not only the search but the disappearance itself loomed in the air. Meeting these new figures and the suspicions that began to emerge shaped a new path for the investigation. Each key character that entered the story brought a new perspective, but also more mysteries and questions to be answered. The feeling that something was being covered up, something deeper and darker in the mountains, was only growing. The truth seemed to be in plain sight, but at the same time, far away, and the next step in the search for answers was about to challenge everyone involved. As the investigation into the disappearance of the couple in the Andes progressed, revelations began to take an unexpected and surprising turn. With every new clue, the mystery became more complex and multifaceted, challenging all the theories and explanations that had been considered up until that point. What once seemed like a simple case of an accident or disappearance was now unfolding into something much more intricate. The discoveries made by the authorities and investigative team indicated that the couple might have been involved in something much bigger, and the pieces of the puzzle started fitting together in ways no one could have predicted. The first major twist came when new documents and confidential reports were found in an old file belonging to one of the original rescuers. The document was hidden among other reports and expedition summaries, but it contained information that had never been disclosed before. The records mentioned an incident during the couple's expedition where they had found something, but this discovery was never officially detailed. The file only stated that during one of their stops, the couple came across an unexplored area that appeared to have unusual geological features, something that could be the key to the mystery of their journey. However, instead of reporting the discovery clearly, the document suggested that this part of the expedition had been erased from the official records. The reason for such a decision was never clarified, but investigators couldn't ignore this gap in the story. The wife of the missing man, who had become deeply involved in the investigation, began to realize that much more was being hidden than anyone had imagined. The found document suggested that the couple might have discovered something of geological importance, but the way the incident was handled by the authorities indicated that there was a deliberate attempt to cover up the truth. The idea that the couple might have stumbled upon an important discovery in the mountains, and that this could have led to their disappearance, added a new dimension to the mystery. It wasn't just a lost expedition under extreme conditions, but a story being covered up, perhaps due to greater, darker, and even more dangerous interests. The wife, now more determined than ever, began to gather information about any possible discoveries that might be related to her husband's disappearance. But the search for the truth wasn't easy. As new revelations surfaced, confrontations and obstacles also intensified. The wife, in her relentless pursuit of answers, began to encounter resistance from people who had previously been seen as allies. The investigative team started to realize that, although some information appeared to be surfacing openly, there was a silent effort to prevent the full truth from being revealed. One of the biggest confrontations occurred when she decided to confront the local authorities about the omission of the geological incident in the records. Her insistence on wanting to know more led to a series of heated discussions with those responsible for the initial investigation. During a critical meeting, The rescue team members began to show signs of discomfort, as if they were trying to steer the conversation toward another topic. And this only increased the distrust of everyone involved. The wife then made a crucial decision. She sought out Ricardo, the veteran mountaineer who had been a key figure in subsequent expeditions and one of the first to get involved in the case. While Ricardo had been an ally in her search for the truth, he was also hiding something. During a confidential conversation between them, Ricardo inadvertently revealed details that had been obscured until then. He spoke about a rumor circulating among climbers and local authorities, something he had heard from one of his close friends. According to this rumor, the couple hadn't just made a geological discovery, but something that could affect large economic and political interests. The rumor suggested that before disappearing, the couple had found something in the mountains that could have been of great value, something that, if exposed, could impact trade negotiations and political dealings between local governments and large corporations eyeing the region. Realizing what he had just said, Ricardo tried to correct himself, but it was too late. The wife, now with a new lead, felt she was closer than ever to understanding what had truly happened. But at the same time, she also felt scared. If it were true that the couple had made such a significant discovery, it would explain the efforts to cover up what happened to them. But it also cast new shadows over the intentions of those involved. The wife knew that if there was something of great value in the mountains, there might be many more people willing to silence the truth. With this new information, the investigation took a new direction. The team began to search for more details about this possible discovery, trying to identify who might have benefited from the couple's disappearance. They started investigating large corporations and the political interests involved in the region's exploration, and soon discovered that there was a complex game of power and money underway. The area where the couple had disappeared was rich in rare minerals and natural resources, which were being contested by multinational companies. What the couple might have found in the mountains, and what could have led to their disappearance, now seemed to involve much more than just a personal search or a natural accident. There was something much bigger at stake, something that had attracted the attention of powerful people who had everything to lose if the discovery was exposed. As the investigators followed these leads, confrontations began to intensify. There were forces behind the investigation trying to prevent any new discoveries from being made. One tense night, a member of the investigative team, a journalist following the case, mysteriously disappeared. Although no convincing explanation was found for his disappearance, many began to suspect he had been silenced for uncovering something he shouldn't have. Fear and paranoia began to spread among those involved in the investigation, as everyone feared that their own discoveries might also put them in danger. The wife, now more determined than ever, began questioning everything and everyone. Who was behind the efforts to keep the truth hidden? What were the greater interests being protected? She knew that the only way to reach the truth was to go to the bottom of the case, no matter the consequences. But as she got closer to the answer, more dangers emerged along the way. This phase of the investigation was marked by a series of intense confrontations, both physical and emotional. The main characters began to question their own loyalties and the intentions of those around them. The truth seemed within reach, but each discovery came at a price that, in some way, was being paid by everyone involved. The couple, who had once been seen merely as victims of an accident, were now seen as part of a bigger game, something connected to a riddle whose answers could have much deeper implications for everyone involved. As revelations multiplied, the future of the investigation seemed increasingly uncertain. Suspicions spread like wildfire, and no one knew who to trust anymore. What had started as a simple search for a missing couple was now turning into a battle for control over information and power. The truth, which everyone had sought so fervently, was becoming harder and harder to find. and the confrontations only increased as the mystery deepened. As the investigation into the disappearance of the couple in the Andes advanced, the revelations began to take an unexpected and surprising turn. With each new clue, the mystery became more complex and multifaceted, challenging all the theories and explanations that had been considered up until that point. What had once seemed like a simple case of an accident or disappearance was now unfolding into something much more intricate. The discoveries made by the authorities and investigative team indicated that the couple might have been involved in something much bigger, and the pieces of the puzzle started fitting together in ways no one could have predicted. The first major twist came when new documents and confidential reports were found in an old file belonging to one of the original rescuers. The document had been hidden among other reports and expedition summaries, but it contained information that had never been disclosed before. The records mentioned an incident during the couple's expedition where they had found something, but this discovery was never officially detailed. The file only stated that during one of their stops, the couple came across an unexplored area that appeared to have unusual geological features, something that could be the key to the mystery of their journey. However, instead of reporting the discovery clearly, the document suggested that this part of the expedition had been erased from the official records. The reason for such a decision was never clarified, but investigators couldn't ignore this gap in the story. The wife of the missing man, who had become deeply involved in the investigation, began to realize that much more was being hidden than anyone had imagined. The found document suggested that the couple might have discovered something of geological importance, but the way the incident was handled by the authorities indicated that there was a deliberate attempt to cover up the truth. The idea that the couple might have stumbled upon an important discovery in the mountains, and that this could have led to their disappearance, added a new dimension to the mystery. It wasn't just a lost expedition under extreme conditions, but a story being covered up, perhaps due to greater, darker, and even more dangerous interests. The wife, now more determined than ever, began to gather information about any possible discoveries that might be related to her husband's disappearance. But the search for the truth wasn't easy. As new revelations surfaced, confrontations and obstacles also intensified. The wife, in her relentless pursuit of answers, began to encounter resistance from people who had previously been seen as allies. The investigative team started to realize that, although some information appeared to be surfacing openly, there was a silent effort to prevent the full truth from being revealed. One of the biggest confrontations occurred when she decided to confront the local authorities about the omission of the geological incident in the records. Her insistence on wanting to know more led to a series of heated discussions with those responsible for the initial investigation. During a critical meeting, the rescue team members began to show signs of discomfort, as if they were trying to steer the conversation toward another topic, and this only increased the distrust of everyone involved. The wife then made a crucial decision. She sought out Ricardo, the veteran mountaineer who had been a key figure in subsequent expeditions and one of the first to get involved in the case. While Ricardo had been an ally in her search for the truth, he was also hiding something. During a confidential conversation between them, Ricardo inadvertently revealed details that had been obscured until then. He spoke about a rumor circulating among climbers and local authorities, something he had heard from one of his close friends. According to this rumor, the couple hadn't just made a geological discovery, but something that could affect large economic and political interests. The rumor suggested that, before disappearing, the couple had found something in the mountains that could have been of great value, something that, if exposed, could impact trade negotiations and political dealings between local governments and large corporations eyeing the region. Realizing what he had just said, Ricardo tried to correct himself, but it was too late. The wife, now with a new lead, felt she was closer than ever to understanding what had truly happened. But at the same time, she also felt scared. If it were true that the couple had made such a significant discovery, it would explain the efforts to cover up what happened to them. But it also cast new shadows over the intentions of those involved. The wife knew that if there was something of great value in the mountains, there might be many more people willing to silence the truth. With this new information, the investigation took a new direction. The team began to search for more details about this possible discovery, trying to identify who might have benefited from the couple's disappearance. They started investigating large corporations and the political interests involved in the region's exploration, and soon discovered that there was a complex game of power and money underway. The area where the couple had disappeared was rich in rare minerals and natural resources, which were being contested by multinational companies. What the couple might have found in the mountains, and what could have led to their disappearance, now seemed to involve much more than just a personal search or a natural accident. There was something much bigger at stake, something that had attracted the attention of powerful people who had everything to lose if the discovery was exposed. As the investigators followed these leads, confrontations began to intensify. There were forces behind the investigation trying to prevent any new discoveries from being made. One tense night, a member of the investigative team, a journalist following the case, mysteriously disappeared. Although no convincing explanation was found for his disappearance, many began to suspect he had been silenced for uncovering something he shouldn't have. Fear and paranoia began to spread among those involved in the investigation, as everyone feared that their own discoveries might also put them in danger. The wife, now more determined than ever, began questioning everything and everyone. Who was behind the efforts to keep the truth hidden? What were the greater interests being protected? She knew that the only way to reach the truth was to go to the bottom of the case, no matter the consequences. But as she got closer to the answer, more dangers emerged along the way. This phase of the investigation was marked by a series of intense confrontations, both physical and emotional. The main characters began to question their own loyalties and the intentions of those around them. The truth seemed within reach, but each discovery came at a price that, in some way, was being paid by everyone involved. The couple, who had once been seen merely as victims of an accident, were now seen as part of a bigger game, something connected to a riddle whose answers could have much deeper implications for everyone involved. As revelations multiplied, the future of the investigation seemed increasingly uncertain. Suspicions spread like wildfire, and no one knew who to trust anymore. What had started as a simple search for a missing couple was now turning into a battle for control over information and power. The truth, which everyone had sought so fervently, was becoming harder and harder to find, and the confrontations only increased as the mystery deepened. After the intense and risky expedition, the truth finally began to emerge from the depths of the Andes Mountains. The diary found in the cave and the discovery of personal items belonging to the couple, along with the evidence of a subsequent expedition, formed a narrative that transformed the case of a simple disappearance into a complex and dangerous plot. The mountains, which had hidden the couple's secrets for so many years, now seemed ready to reveal their dark truths, but this would not come without a high cost. The wife, who for all these years had faced the emptiness of loss and the anguish of uncertainty, was finally confronted with something concrete, something tangible that could put an end to her suffering. The pain and frustration of so many years had transformed into immense determination to bring the truth to light, not only to understand what happened to her husband, but also to discover why so many people had tried to cover up the events that led to his disappearance. The evidence that had been discovered at the improvised campsite, along with the records left by other expeditioners, was carefully analyzed. The diary found, which had been written by one of the climbers who arrived after the couple's disappearance, clearly indicated that the couple had come across a geological discovery that wasn't just significant, but possibly of great value to political and commercial interests. What the two had found in the mountains appeared to be a rare mineral or natural resource that could shift the balance of power between major economic powers. The couple, therefore, hadn't just disappeared due to a personal tragedy, but because they were involved in something much larger that couldn't be revealed. With the discovery of this information, the investigation began to take a new direction. The wife, knowing she was at a crossroads, threw herself even more fervently into the pursuit of justice. The authorities, now forced to reconsider their initial approach, began releasing information that had previously been withheld, but the process of revealing the full truth was much more complex and involved powerful interests. Those responsible for withholding information, who now appeared to be linked to large corporations and even political figures, were now under investigation. The reality that powerful forces were trying to cover up what happened to the couple became evident to everyone involved in the investigation. What had seemed like just an accident in the mountains was now revealing itself as a case of information concealment, manipulation, and shady interests. However, the search for justice was far from easy. With every step taken to uncover more, new barriers emerged. The wife, in her relentless effort, was confronted not only with legal obstacles, but also veiled threats from people who were desperate to keep the truth hidden. On several occasions, she was followed, and her movements were monitored. The investigative team also faced immense pressure, with some members beginning to question whether the risk was worth it. As the deeper they went, the more dangers appeared. The big twist, however, came when a leak of information began to shine a light on the corporate and political interests involved. Confidential documents were handed to an investigative journalist who had been following the case from the start, and this led to a public investigation into the ties between those responsible for the expedition and large corporations with a stake in the region where the couple had disappeared. The discovery that the couple had found a mine of rare natural resources in the Andes Mountains not only explained their disappearance but also revealed a much larger game of interests in which they had been used as disposable pieces. This leak of information was crucial in exposing those responsible for attempting to cover up the truth. The wife finally managed to get justice. She was able to bring the case to international media, and public pressure led the authorities to take more aggressive measures. Executives from companies involved in hiding the couple's discoveries were called to provide explanations, and some were finally arrested on charges of corruption and information manipulation. Although justice was not fully achieved, as many of those involved at higher levels managed to escape punishment, the truth about what really happened to the couple finally came to light. The emotional impact on the wife was immense, as although she had obtained some answers, the cost of digging so deep into the truth was enormous. What she discovered about what really happened to her husband was both a liberation and a condemnation. The couple hadn't been victims of a simple accident. They had been victims of a conspiracy involving powerful economic and political interests. This weighed heavily on her, as discovering the truth meant dealing with the loss, not only of her husband, but of a system that was corrupt at its core. Justice, in many ways, was a compensation for the immeasurable pain she had suffered, but the emotional cost was high. The resolution of the case didn't bring complete relief. Although the wife gained a sense of closure, she knew there was a price to bringing the truth to light. Justice, however, gave her the certainty that her husband hadn't disappeared for no reason, that he and his partner hadn't simply been swallowed by the mountains without leaving a trace by accident. What the couple had found in the mountains had been a secret that some were willing to kill to keep. But even with the revelations, the case didn't have a complete resolution. Justice was never fully achieved, as some powerful figures continued to operate in the shadows, avoiding the consequences of their actions. The process of information concealment and manipulation of facts remained a sensitive subject, and those who sought the truth had to fight not only against the natural elements of the mountains, but also against the men who were part of the larger power game. The case of the couple's disappearance in the Andes became a symbol of how truth can be distorted and how the interests of a few can affect the fate of many. But in the end, the wife was able to understand that the pursuit of justice is not something that always brings immediate peace. Sometimes, it's an ongoing journey. Although she obtained answers, the journey the couple made in the mountains remains immortalized, not only for the mysteries surrounding their death, but for the legacy of courage and the search for truth they left for all those who followed them. Thus, the truth was revealed, justice was partially done, but the emotional and psychological cost remained, and with it, the eternal reminder that behind every story, there is much more than what the eyes can see. With the revelation of the truth, the disappearance of the couple in the Andes finally took its course, but the weight of the discoveries was deeper than anyone could have imagined. The wife, who had spent years nurturing the pain of loss and the frustration of uncertainty, was now faced with a painful and revealing truth. She had finally learned what had truly happened to her husband, but the answer didn't bring relief, only a bittersweet sense of closure. The truth about the couple's discovery in the mountains and the involvement of powerful interests turned the case into something far more complex and darker than a simple tragedy. But the search for the truth came at a high price, and it was a price the wife had to pay. After so many years of struggle, of endless questions, the wife reached an answer. But she soon realized that not everything would be as simple as she had imagined. Justice, which at first seemed like liberation, turned out to be a double-edged sword. On one hand, she obtained the certainty that the couple hadn't been victims of a natural accident. They had found something of great value in the mountains, something that had attracted the attention of powerful economic and political forces. On the other hand, the impact of this discovery forced her to face an even harder truth. The interests behind hiding the truth weren't just financial, but involved a network of corruption and manipulation far more extensive than she could have ever imagined. The pain of loss, now accompanied by the disappointment of discovering how the system had become complicit in the tragedy of her husband, was unbearable. For years, she had clung to the idea that by finding answers, she could finally find peace. But she quickly realized that the truth, although liberating in essence, also carried a heavy burden. She discovered that the truth wasn't something that could be consumed easily. It was an unrelenting force, one that made people question everything around them. The couple, in some way, had become an important piece in a much larger game, and the price of getting involved in that plot had been their own lives. After the revelations, the wife found herself once again at the center of an emotional battle. What to do with the truth now in her hands? How to cope with the fact that what she had sought for so many years wasn't a simple story of love, adventure, and loss, but a story of power, exploitation, and interests that transcended the limits of her understanding. The truth, finally revealed, was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it provided emotional closure, but on the other, it challenged everything the wife believed to be true about the world, about people, and even about her own husband. In a moment of reflection, she remembered all the times she thought that by moving forward, she would solve the mystery. In her search, she came face to face with the reality that the mountains, which once seemed to be the backdrop of a simple tragedy, were more than just a setting for an accident. They hid secrets that, once revealed, could change the fate of many. The wife found herself on the edge of an unsettling truth. Her husband and his partner hadn't disappeared by chance. They were victims of something much larger, something involving great interests, and by making their discovery, they became targets. They had been deceived, perhaps, by the idea that they were exploring something beautiful and challenging, but instead, they encountered the cruel face of a system that manipulates, hides, and destroys. The wife then reflected on her own journey. She had invested her whole being in search of answers. For her, this search had become a way to cope with the pain and emptiness left by her husband's disappearance. Throughout the process, she had been forced to confront not only what happened to him, but also who she truly was, who she had become in the process of seeking answers. She felt that, by following this path, she was reconnecting with him in some way, living through the clues he left behind and the traces of his journey. But now, with the truth in front of her, she knew that her own identity had become deeply intertwined with what she had discovered. Her fight for the truth hadn't only transformed her into a woman who wanted to understand what happened to her husband, but into a warrior who confronted a flawed and corrupt system, and who, in some way, had always known that the answers would never be easy to accept. The mountains, with their brutal beauty and relentless vastness, now took on new meaning. They were no longer the place where her husband and his partner disappeared, but the place where the flaws of the system and the machinations that govern the world around us were uncovered. They had been the silent witnesses to a plot that could not be understood without a great emotional and psychological cost. And looking back, the wife realized that her search for the truth had been much more than a simple quest for answers. It was an internal journey of transformation, where she was forced to face reality without the lens of grief and blind hope. But as the years passed, something inside her began to change. She finally understood that justice, though important, is not the key to healing. True resolution doesn't come from revenge or the punishment of the guilty, but from the process of accepting what cannot be changed. The pain and suffering from the loss of her husband would never disappear, but she now knew that no matter how hard it was, she couldn't let hate and bitterness consume her. She needed to find peace, not in fully understanding the motivations of the forces that manipulated the couple's lives, but in accepting that truth has a cost that not everyone is willing to pay. In the end, the wife was able to reflect on her husband's legacy and what her search for the truth represented. She understood that his death, although tragic, was not in vain. She carried with her not just his memory, but the understanding that sometimes the greatest truth is the one that frees us from the chains of the past. The journey she lived was one of learning, pain, and acceptance, and in the end, she found a kind of peace that was beyond the answers. She understood that the true legacy of her husband was not the relentless search for answers, but the courage to face the unknown, and above all, the ability to love without hesitation, even when the world around them seemed to fall apart.